All right. Thank you, Pat, and thank you all for being here. I mean, this is an incredible moment, and to see that so many people came from so far away in the United States, from different parts of Guatemala, to be here for this is it's moving for this. And this event that we're celebrating, I mean, 50 years for the life of the organization is momentous. There's thousands of NGOs in Guatemala, and the majority of which work in health in some way. But none of them have the longevity of ALDEA or the continuity, right? And our commitment to working with people in a place and the philosophy that my grandfather developed and that we continue to carry on. So I am one of Dr. Carol Berhorst's grandchildren, and for the past 20 years, I've had the opportunity to come to Guatemala and spend a lot of time with the organizations and with a lot of the extended family that we have. Growing up in Idaho, my grandpa was either in Guatemala or New Orleans, and I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with him. He passed away when I was 13, and the chances that I did have to spend were either Christmas vacations, where we would pack up in the family van and drive from Idaho to New Orleans, or the couple months in the early 80s that he lived with us after having to flee the violence in Guatemala. But growing up, I always heard stories, right, from my mom and my dad and aunts and uncles about my grandpa's work and what he did. And like many of you here tonight, my career and my understanding of health and in development are very directly shaped by my grandpa's philosophy and his work. Going into college, I wanted to be my grandpa. I went to Tulane University where he taught. I entered as a pre-med student, and within the first year realized that I'm much more of a liberal arts person. And so I switched from medical school to anthropology and Latin American studies, right? And was still able to work it to have my focus on medical anthropology, specializing in health and development in Guatemala. And so able to do the things that I wanted to do without going through med school. It also gave me the chance to take classes in Cachiquel Maya from my step-grandma, who taught at Tulane. And this was my first opportunity to come down to Guatemala to continue language training in that. And that was the point where I first started to really understand the impact of my grandpa's work and the work that ALDEA continues to do. So as an anthropologist and a board member of ALDEA, I've had a lot of opportunities to travel throughout the Department of Chimaltenango to rural communities of all types. And one thing that still amazes me is that wherever I go, no matter how far the community, no matter how small, somebody has a story of my grandpa, right? That somebody, when they find out that I'm related to him, will track me down, will sit me down and tell me something, about him. Sometimes it's because they participated in the projects. More often it's because they or one of their family members was a patient of his, and they will tell me their experience with that, even if it was once, 40 years ago, right? That people still have this fondness and admiration for him. And part of this was my grandpa's very jovial personality. Part of it was his Spanish with the very heavy Kansas twang added to it. But more than that, it was his philosophy and then the sensitivity to and respect for Maya culture and identity. My grandpa treated everybody as an equal, and the way that he received people in the clinic was the same. And it didn't matter where you came from, what language you spoke, or what clothes you wore. You were welcome in the clinic. And at a time of a lot of structural inequality and discrimination, which still exists to this day, this was something very unique for that. My grandpa also came to Guatemala as a student, as he said, realizing that as much medical knowledge and specialties as he had, that the Maya he was working with had as much, if not more, to teach him than he had to teach them. And it was his student days, like as he called them, that really influenced his philosophy and the nature of his work. And I just want to mention a couple of these major transitions that he went through, because it still serves as our primary orientation in the work that ALDEA does today. So first, my grandfather redefined the concept of a hospital. So opposed to the idea of a modern hospital, a very sterile context that is focused on the individual patient, my grandpa focused on the family and community in the healing process. Right? Family members were invited to stay with the patient at the clinic. They were able to cook for the patient. They cleaned. They lived with him while they were there. And it was through that process, right, of inviting people in, inviting family to be there, that he saw this as a way to make the hospital an acceptable space. Right? And what emerged was a very unique Ketchikel version, right, of a hospital space. Many of the nurses in the hospital were also Ketchikel, right, and wore traje and spoke the language of the people that they were serving, right, which is something that was unheard of at the time. Second, my grandfather challenged the concept of the doctor, right, the idea that only people with specialized medical education and degrees from elite schools had the power and authority to diagnose and treat illness. And instead, he revolutionized this idea by training local individuals who were selected by their communities in basic curative medicine so that they could provide healthcare in their own communities, in the language of the people, in a way that they would accept. Third, my grandfather challenged the notion of health and development. So as a medical doctor, when he came down as a Lutheran missionary in 1959, and once he started the clinic in 1962, his focus was on curative medicine. But he realized very quickly that, as he said, this was like trying to empty, if not the Atlantic Ocean, at least a good-sized lake with a medical teaspoon. Right? That it makes you feel busy and people admire your spoon, but you're never going to end it. And instead, through his learning process with the Ketchikel, he realized that improving health conditions requires an integrated development program. Right? That instead of focusing on curative medicine, his program started to focus much more on the underlying causes of poor health, which included agriculture, education, nutrition, water, family planning, economics, and land ownership. And curative medicine, in fact, became the lowest priority, like, for his development program with that. So at the center of all of this, and the ultimate goal, of my grandpa's work here, was this notion of empowerment, right? Which my grandfather defined as providing people with the economic, political, and social capacity to identify and address their own development goals and needs. And so individuals, rather than being framed as passive recipients or dependent upon the aid of foreigners, were very active participants in this process, right? Of being able to identify what they feel are their needs and to collaborate with the clinic and ALDEA in addressing those issues. So my grandfather's philosophy of health and development, which focuses on empowerment, integrated development, and culturally appropriate services, has become a model for healthcare delivery not only in Chimaltenango or Guatemala, but worldwide. It was named by the World Health Organization as one of the top 10 exemplar models of community health and development. The hundreds of medical students, Peace Corps volunteers, or Peace Corps workers and volunteers who have passed through the clinic, several of whom are with us tonight, have taken their experiences and the lessons they learned at the clinic to the places that they are working, right? Back to the United States or other countries. Here in Guatemala, many of the people that were involved in the clinic continue this work. Many of the health promoters that were trained by my grandpa continued practicing medicine in rural communities. Their sons and daughters, many are now doctors or nurses who are working in development organizations. And several of the organizations that emerged out of the clinic, working on land reform or agricultural cooperatives, are still very active, right? Addressing these underlying causes of poor health in the area. And so our own work continues to be guided by my grandpa's philosophy, right? These ideas of empowerment, integrated development, and culturally appropriate services in collaboration with community members. And while there have been numerous changes in Guatemala over the past 50 years, this philosophy and strategy still holds. Right? And so we greatly appreciate your participation in this process, from those of you who have been with us for decades to those of you who are just joining us tonight. right? And we look forward to collaborating with you, with ABPD, and the communities that we partner with over our next 50 years. So thank you again for coming, and have a good evening.